a ship drifting silently in the vast Pacific. Its decks eerily still, supplies untouched, cargo abandoned, and not a single soul on board. In October 1955, the MV Joyita was discovered adrift near Fiji, a vessel that should have been on a simple 2-day voyage between Samoa and the Tokelau Islands. Instead, it was found 5 weeks later, scarred by damage and listing heavily, yet still afloat thanks to its cork-lined hull. The strangest part, her crew of 25 had vanished without a trace. No distress call was ever received, no lifeboats were found, and not a single body was recovered. Fuel tanks were full, food supplies untouched, and life jackets left behind, as if everyone had simply disappeared into thin air. Join us as we uncover one of the most chilling and unexplained maritime mysteries in history. The MV Joyita was a 69-foot wooden trading vessel built in 1931 in Los Angeles. Originally designed as a luxury yacht, she was sleek and stylish, carrying the promise of adventure on the open sea. During World War II, the U.S. Navy pressed her into service as a patrol boat, and later, she was converted into a cargo vessel, ferrying supplies and passengers across the scattered islands of the South Pacific. For many, the Joyita was a familiar sight, a lifeline for small island communities where ships were the only connection to the outside world. Despite her proud nickname, the Queen of the South Seas, Joyita, was far from flawless. Her engines were notoriously unreliable, and constant breakdowns plagued her voyages. Her cork-lined hull made her almost impossible to sink. But decades of wear had left her structure weakened and her reputation mixed. Mariners respected her resilience, but few trusted her completely. On October 3, 1955, Joyita departed Apia Harbor, Samoa, bound for the Tokelau Islands. A routine trip of just 270 miles, expected to take less than 48 hours. On board were 25 people, Captain Thomas "Dusty" Miller, his loyal crew, and passengers including traders, officials, and even a doctor carrying urgent medical supplies. It should have been a straightforward journey. Instead, it became a voyage that would never be completed. None of those 25 souls would ever be seen again. The Joyita set out under calm skies, her decks stacked with cargo that included medical supplies, timber, barrels of oil, and crates of food. It was nothing unusual, just another run across the South Pacific. At the helm was Captain Thomas "Dusty" Miller, a man with decades of experience at sea. Though respected, Miller had a reputation for being stubborn, often dismissing advice and relying heavily on his own judgment. Still, he was a seasoned mariner, and few doubted he could complete such a short and routine trip. But the ship never arrived. Days slipped into nights, and anxiety spread across the islands. Families and friends who had expected the Joyita to dock in less than 2 days waited in vain. When news of her delay reached officials, an aerial search was launched. Planes scoured the vast blue expanse of the Pacific, covering thousands of square miles. Yet, no trace appeared, no wreckage, no lifeboats, not even a floating barrel from her cargo. After weeks of searching, the operation was finally called off. The conclusion seemed inevitable. Joyita and her 25 passengers and crew had vanished beneath the waves. Grief settled over the islands as loved ones mourned, convinced the vessel had sunk and carried all hands down with her. But then, 5 weeks later, came a discovery so shocking that it turned tragedy into one of the greatest maritime mysteries of the 20th century. On November 10, 1955, more than a month after she disappeared, a merchant vessel finally sighted the MV Joyita drifting aimlessly in the open Pacific. She was far from where she should have been, over 600 miles off course near Fiji. The ship leaned heavily to one side, partially submerged, yet still afloat, her cork-lined hull keeping her stubbornly above the waves. When rescuers climbed aboard, the scene was nothing short of chilling. The ship was completely deserted. Not a single passenger or crew member remained, as if they had simply evaporated into thin air. The lifeboats were gone, suggesting an evacuation. But if the crew had abandoned ship, why leave behind a vessel that was still floating? The radio lay smashed and strangely set to the emergency channel, as though someone had desperately tried to send a distress call. On deck, investigators found blood-stained bandages, hinting that someone had been injured before the vessel was deserted. Below deck, the story grew even stranger. Much of the cargo had vanished, including timber and valuable medical supplies. Yet despite these ominous signs, the Joyita herself still carried full fuel tanks. Her storerooms remained stacked with untouched food and water. The engine, however, was in disrepair, and the auxiliary pump meant to keep water out of the hull had failed, allowing some flooding. But the flooding wasn't nearly enough to sink her. Experts later confirmed that the Joyita was practically unsinkable. With her cork-lined hull, she would have stayed afloat indefinitely, no matter the damage. And so, the great mystery took shape. If the ship was still seaworthy, her supplies untouched, and her fuel reserves full, what had compelled Captain Miller and his 24 companions to abandon her in the middle of the ocean? What terror had forced them off a vessel that by all logic should have been their safest refuge? With no survivors and no bodies ever recovered, speculation quickly filled the void left by the unanswered questions. Over the decades, countless theories have been put forward, each one attempting to explain the inexplicable disappearance of Joyita's crew. Some historians believe the answer lies in mechanical failure and human panic. The ship had indeed taken on water after her auxiliary pump broke down, and while Captain Miller was known for his stubborn confidence in the vessel's unsinkable design, others aboard may not have shared his faith. Perhaps, in a moment of fear, the passengers and crew abandoned ship in lifeboats, believing she was doomed. Yet this explanation falters under one glaring fact. No lifeboats or bodies were ever recovered in the vast Pacific, as though they too had vanished into thin air. Another theory points to piracy. The disappearance of cargo, including valuable medical supplies and timber, suggested to some that raiders might have intercepted the Joyita, killed or kidnapped her occupants, and looted the ship. But the evidence of violence was almost non-existent, limited only to a few blood-stained bandages. Then there is the possibility of mutiny. Captain Miller was a respected seaman, but also a notoriously domineering figure. And some have speculated that tensions on board erupted, with crew or passengers rebelling against his authority. Still, if there had been a mutiny, the mutineers themselves disappeared without a trace, leaving behind no survivors to tell the tale. For others, the answer might lie in money. The idea of insurance fraud has been whispered ever since, with some suggesting the ship was deliberately sabotaged to claim compensation. Miller's own financial struggles added fuel to this theory, but no real proof has ever surfaced to tie him or anyone else to a fraudulent scheme. More conspiratorial voices, meanwhile, see the shadow of geopolitics. The Pacific in the 1950s was alive with Cold War tension, military testing, and covert operations. What if the Joyita had stumbled upon something it was never meant to witness, a secret weapons test, a smuggling route, or classified naval activity? Could the crew have been silenced to preserve secrets too dangerous to reveal? It's a possibility that remains tantalizing, but unproven. And then, of course, come the more supernatural explanations. To some, the Joyita has become the Mary Celeste of the Pacific, a vessel cursed by fate or touched by forces beyond our understanding. Whispers of alien abductions, sea monsters, or ghostly interventions have followed the ship's story for decades, adding to its eerie allure. Yet, for all the imagination these tales inspire, they offer no real evidence, only speculation. In the end, every theory, from the rational to the fantastical, leaves more questions than answers. The simple haunting fact remains unchanged. 25 men, women, and children boarded the Joyita on that October day in 1955, and not one of them was ever seen again. For the families of the missing, the Joyita mystery was devastating. Wives, children, and parents waited in vain for news that never came. Many clung to hope that survivors had drifted to a remote island, but no trace was ever found. The South Pacific island communities mourned not just the loss of people, but of trust in the sea itself. If even an unsinkable ship could vanish into silence, what safety could anyone truly expect? For decades, the Joyita remained a ghost in maritime memory, her wreck sold and resold, patched up, and even put back into service briefly before being abandoned for good. But her story, the story of a voyage that ended in nothing but questions, continues to echo across the Pacific. The MV Joyita has been called the Mary Celeste of the Pacific, a ship adrift, its people gone, its fate unanswered. More than 65 years later, the ocean still guards her secret. Why did 25 people vanish from a ship that refused to sink? Was it panic, piracy, mutiny, or something much stranger? We may never know. But one thing is certain, the MV Joyita stands as a haunting reminder that in the battle between humans and the sea, the ocean always has the final word. What do you think happened aboard the Joyita? Share your theory in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's great maritime mysteries, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss the next story from the depths of the world's oceans.